Hey guys, welcome to Comic Asylum. I'm Jesse.
And I'm Sean.
And today we are going to be talking about Civil War, the comic. Although we have both seen the movie, so I guess I should say that certain elements of the movie might make their way into our discussion. So I want to give a bit of a spoiler warning.
Spoilers!
Yeah, I don't think we're going to get into in depth with it, but, obviously, being a movie based off this story, there are certain things that we might touch on.
Absolutely. I mean, there's certain elements to both this and that are kind of pretty, critical to the storytelling of this conflict that happens. But for the most part, we are going to focus on the comic and the massive political upheaval that this comic has caused for the comic universe of Marvel.
Civil War. This was, Marvel in the last, couple decades, comic events have become a staple of the industry. Almost, there's barely a year that goes by now where either DC or Marvel isn't putting out some big event. And this had happened before Civil War with things like Infinity War and House of M. But Civil War was the one that, for me, really caught my attention in terms of Marvel's side of the events. It's actually one of the first Avengers books, and only Avengers books I've ever read. Because the Avengers side of the Marvel Universe I've mostly stayed away from. I've always been a Justice League person.
See, I'm an Avengers person. I like the Avengers way more than the Justice League.
Yeah.
But
I like their movies.
That's fair. But, the Avengers for me, Civil War, this is my second or third or fourth time reading. I don't remember how many times now.
Yeah.
But this, to me, same idea. This was a pretty crucial element to the Marvel world. And when you're bringing together so many different stories and they're coming to this bottleneck that is the Civil War, it's pretty epic.
It certainly had a lot of influence on the Marvel Universe at the time, and the effects from the story were played out over a number of years after it.
In fact, Civil War 2 will be coming out in the next year.
That is. Look at you becoming all comic savvy.
Yeah, look at that.
Yeah.
I did my research.
Yeah. With Marvel, I've always been more of an X-Men person if I'm reading a team book, and that's kind of always filled my quota in terms of teams.
And the thing I love about Civil War is that it literally does incorporate the X-Men, just so many different elements of the Marvel Universe, the Fantastic Four, you got, Spider-Man in there. I know he was part of the Avengers for a while, but you have all of these different heroes coming together, the Defenders, coming together for this giant, critical, political movement that's happening.
Right. This is less of a Avengers comic even, as, I'd say it's more of a Marvel Universe comic.
Yeah, I actually would say that in order to understand this specific book, Civil War, as the Avengers Civil War component to the Marvel Universe, you actually do have to have some knowledge in regards to the X-Men, Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four, and everything that kind of leads up to this, because this book alone, though it's a great read, there's some elements that might seem kind of confusing or might not seem full. And you get that from all the other stories, from all the other characters that kind of feed into this event.
Well, that's the thing. When this first came out a number of years ago, I had read it. I was reading Amazing Spider-Man, so that was my door into this event. And reading X-Men, I read the Captain America bit that went along with this series. And you really, I felt, just reading this story, I thought that it was missing a lot of crucial elements that were introduced in a lot of the side stories.
Yeah, absolutely. For example, in the story Spider-Man, as you were just discussing, that's how you kind of got into Civil War. In this story, you start off with Spider-Man siding with Iron Man, Tony Stark, pro-registration. He reveals himself to the world. I'm Spider-Man, I'm Peter Parker. It's big moment. He's picked a side. He thinks this is the way to go. Mm-hmm. There's a panel on the third or fourth book in Civil War. It starts off with Tony Stark and Spider-Man arguing. All of a sudden, Spider-Man has changed his position. And Tony Stark tells him, you can't. Mm-hmm. If you leave now, you will be considered a criminal and we will have to arrest you and put you in prison. You will have no choice.
And they kind of just have that scene in the comic.
Yes.
They don't have the whole,
Reason
rationale.
why.
Yeah.
So, and that's exactly it. If you read the Amazing Spider-Man runs that lead up to that, it's all about how when he made this decision, it had these life-changing effects on Aunt May and Mary Jane and his family life.
Well, it ended up leading to the his marriage basically being taken away.
Yeah.
The deal with the devil.
Yeah. I mean, so that's just one example of how you had to kind of read the other stories that feed into Civil War in order to really understand the full complex nature of the individual characters who are involved in this.
Now, I like this book itself. By the way, I should get in there. It is written by Mark Millar, and the art is done by Steve McNiven. Penciler Steve McNiven.
So there you go. So now that Jesse's got that out of the way, which we forgot to do, so terribly sorry. What were you gonna say?
I was gonna say that overall, I did like this book. I think that it's one of the most ballsy Marvel events that they have ever done, and
I love it too. It's absolutely it's so impactful, and you see life-changing things happen to these characters in this book. I mean, this book leads to a whole new world and the politics behind this. I mean, the whole book is premised on the whose side are you on?
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, Sean, whose side are you on? Are you Team Cap or Team Iron Man?
Okay, so this is where I will touch on movie versus the book.
Okay.
In the book, when push comes to shove, I would be on Captain America's side. Mostly because I think that the registration policy itself is poorly designed and poorly implemented. There's certain elements of the policy I think are really good. I do support the notion of registration because in both the movie and the comic, registration comes about because civilians are dying. There's no consequences for these superheroes who are flying around Manhattan and literally on a daily basis blowing up chunks of the city and killing hundreds of people. There's no consequence. They're supposed to be saving us. And I say us because I am a civilian. I'm obviously not a superhero.
And obviously, for the most part, they do.
Yeah. But when you're blowing up a building, there's consequences to that. I mean, the building wasn't evacuated necessarily. You were fighting a monster. You didn't have time to go and evacuate a building. You were fighting, an alien or whatever the case. So people die. So I'm in favor of registration. But the policy that the comic implements is way too. It's so draconian in nature. It's either you sign up and become basically an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., a government employee, or you go to prison in the negative zone, no questions asked, because now you're a traitor.
Yeah.
There's no middle ground. It is way too extreme of a policy repercussion.
Sorry to interrupt you. Unlike the movie also, where there's maybe 10 superpowered people that are active at least, in the Marvel universe by this point, with all the history that's been poured into this universe, you have mutants everywhere, you have people with powers everywhere that don't necessarily fit into this whole Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. mentality that, are going to be thrown away because it's either A or B.
I do want to point out, though, and I'm gonna comic book expert-esque here.
Okay.
There's actually significantly less mutants at this point.
Oh, House of M.
House of M happened just before this, and we know that they went from thousands of mutants to downwards to hundreds.
There were 200 left, I believe.
Yeah, I think that's actually the number Emma Frost gives at the end of House of M. But that's just important to point out. But I do agree. In the movie, the whole premise of the movie is they're just going to regulate the Avengers. Whereas in this world, the comic world, it is every single being who is either a superhero, a mutant, whatever the case, everyone is regulated regardless. And obviously this creates issues for, the X-Men.
I believe they actually end up leaving American soil as a result of this, and they get their little island off the coast of San Francisco.
Yes, they do. And there is dire consequences for this whole thing. And the other thing is that this is only in America. It actually makes reference to the fact that some superheroes trying to avoid prison flee to Canada.
Yeah. Because
we're a country that is awesome and accepts everyone. So we like to tell ourselves. But, I mean, the policy that is created in this versus the movie, if I had to pick a side when it comes to the movie, I'd be on Iron Man's side, 100%.
You're right.
It's the rational, proper thing to do. And the thing I actually love about the comic is, despite the fact that Captain America is super anti-registration, he leads the Secret Avengers, the very end of this book, he realizes he's actually made a big mistake. And this is why, if push came to shove, I would pick Captain America. But I would probably take more of the approach of Doctor Strange. I would stand back and look at the picture as a whole and realize both sides are wrong.
And say, screw it, I'm meditating.
But both sides are right.
Right.
There's merit and validity to both sides, but there's also a lot of wrongful, decisions being made.
Right.
Captain America's side is, want the freedom to continue helping and save people.
Mm-hmm.
But he's being incredibly destructive. And at the end, a group of civilians actually jump on him to stop him. And he says, hey, what are you doing? I'm doing this for you guys. And they say, no, you're not. In the panel, it pans out and shows this part of Midtown Manhattan in flames because it's been destroyed. And Captain America pulls off his masks and says, okay, you're right. I actually am not upholding what I said I wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he walks away with this moral high ground in that sense, but his decision to give up his crusade, because it was getting away from the exact point of his crusade, to me was phenomenal. And that's why ultimately at the end of the day I would pick Captain America.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? I pick Captain America. I don't think that he was against registration even necessarily for himself, but I think he was doing it more to look out for all the people that, shouldn't necessarily register but are going to feel the consequences of this movement. I don't think it was really for selfish reasons. And I do ultimately take a side because, like you said, I don't agree with the registration policies in this book. And overall, he did turn himself in. And, I mean, the negative zone prison, the fact that very early on in the book, Tony Stark builds a Thor android that starts killing superpowered people. So, I mean, I don't blame Cap for fighting back.
No, absolutely.
I totally understand it.
But I do blame him in some aspect because his whole thing is he wants to be able to continue protecting and serving the citizens of the United States of America. But you can't do that when you're killing them while you're saving them.
You can't create peace through war.
Yeah, exactly. And that, like I said, that's why I would take the more Doctor Strange approach, where in this case, in this story, Doctor Strange is up in the north. He's up in his sanctum up in the north, and he's meditating, and he does not want to be involved because he knows both sides are right, but both sides are wrong. Mm-hmm. And that's the big picture here, is that, yes, this book was premised to make you pick a side. Because as a regular person, you would pick a side.
Mm-hmm.
But what we should be doing is looking at the overall situation and trying to come up with a proper compromise on how we could settle this issue.
You're almost saying like they should settle it like adults instead of people that dress up in costumes and punch each other.
Yes, actually, that sounds like Donald Trump. But that's exactly it. They should be settling this as adults and through diplomacy.
Mm-hmm.
There definitely is reason for both sides.
Yeah,
but both sides went about it in a totally horrible approach.
I did find that Iron Man was a little crazy in this storyline. I think he went too far. I think he started off trying to make a compromise. But I feel like once he got involved, he was involved in things that,
I don't disagree to an extent, but I think that has a lot to do with the fact that S.H.I.E.L.D. is manipulating a lot of the situation.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that in the case of Tony Stark is obviously at this point, he has gone through some alcohol problems. He's had some other personal issues he's had to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
He's emotionally unstable.
He was turned into a teenager for a short time.
There you go.
In the 90s.
Wow.
Yeah. So, lots of history to him.
There you go. But he is a character who has, some issues.
Yeah.
And now he's got this school that has been blown up by these B-list superheroes trying to fight almost A-level villains. I mean, at the beginning of the book, it starts off, this reality TV show is has located these villains in this house hiding out, and they're going to run in there and stop them. And the one character actually says, maybe we should call the Avengers. They're a little bit above our pay grade here. And they're like, no, this will look great for the TV cameras. It'll be amazing. So they go in, and the school gets blown up in this fight. Mm-hmm. Hundreds of children die. So Tony Stark becomes close with the mother of one of these children, who has now created this push for registration. Mm-hmm. And being someone who has already suffered greatly in the past, to have this weigh on him as well, knowing that the Avengers and these other superpowered beings have cost the lives of children, I think that's why you see the reaction from Tony Stark that you get. This almost, we need to do everything we can at all costs to make sure people are registered and we can protect people appropriately. Again, S.H.I.E.L.D. in the background with Nick Fury gone. Maria Hill has taken over, and she is way more authoritative than what I think you're used to seeing with S.H.I.E.L.D. I think S.H.I.E.L.D. pulls a lot of the strings, but Tony Stark definitely already had this emotional, destabilizing moment in him, which is why I think you see him acting a little more erratically. And he's not necessarily wrong. I actually feel bad for him, because he's the one who has to deal with this. He's the face of the Avengers. He's the one funding the Avengers.
See, I feel like the movie did a much better job getting that across and making him more sympathetic. And it was actually really interesting going back and reading this book and kind of realizing that it was a pre-Robert Downey Jr. Tony Stark.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Because a lot of those elements from what I've read of Iron Man since that movie came out have kind of implemented some more.
The Robert Downey Jr. Tony Stark that we know.
Yeah, some of those isms.
Yes.
But it was really cool kind of seeing that. But in this book, I don't think that they got across that sympathetic nature in that way as well.
I think they did to an extent. I think it could have been stronger. I do think that the Civil War comic is definitely more biased towards Captain America.
Right.
He does uphold stronger values. I mean, he is essentially fighting against rounding people up and putting them in concentration camps. Mm-hmm. Let's be honest. That is, you build a super mega prison to hold these people you consider to be a threat in some manner.
In a negative zone, in a other dimension.
And if they don't agree with what you tell them, you will put them away forever. It doesn't, there's no, in the movie, there's an option to retire. Mm-hmm. Hawkeye, Clint takes the option of retiring. He's gone into retirement. That's great. That policy is more practical. Even if the option to retire in this existed, there would be less justification for the violence that Captain America's Secret Avengers pump out in order to stop Tony Stark's, pro-registration movement. But the problem is that doesn't exist. That this policy is literally a concentration camp scenario. It's either you obey or you end up in prison in a different universe, and that's it. You're done.
I also think that in the movie, there's a little bit more cause for it in the sense of superheroes play a bit of a different role in the movie. When supervillains and big threats pop up, it's like once a movie, right?
Yeah.
In the Marvel universe, with the comics, you can almost imagine like 10 supervillains running around New York simultaneously that need to be taken care of at any given time.
It happens in real time.
Yeah. So, and there's a lot more of it in that real time. So, to me, in my head, with this book, I can justify kind of being like, well, they kind of need superheroes around, and one team might not quite cut it. You might kind of need that Spider-Man that kind of swings around and deals with the street crime. You might kind of need that Daredevil character in this universe.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, part of the policy, which I do agree with, is this notion of the 50 state superhero teams, this 50 state agenda, or initiative as they call it. This notion that every state will have a superhero team assigned to that state. I mean, in Utah you have Mormon superheroes, and in California you have all these. I don't know if they're hippies. I just assume
Beach Boys
superheroes. But you also in Colorado they actually requested Thunderbolts, which I thought was interesting.
Well, let's talk about the Thunderbolts quickly.
What would you like to say about the Thunderbolts?
Well, I mean, we all know
excellent spin-off from Civil War. Absolutely,
it was actually a really
it
good
was
book.
super great, and that's I think something we'll definitely discuss later in the future.
But I think that was definitely a problem with part of the policy as well. You're victimizing heroes, but you're giving Norman Osborn, of all people, his own team.
A Marvel version of the Suicide Squad. They are taken by the government and tasked with these crazy missions to do their bidding. But if they decide not to, they get, in the case of Marvel, they get like 1,000+ volts of electricity shot through their body, as opposed to a bomb going off on their head. But
yeah, don't put Electro on that team.
There you go. I'm sure they have some other thing for him. But that's the premise, is that exactly you have villains now who have been given this almost second chance, and they get to go out and beat up the former superheroes because they have decided they're against the government's concentration camp policy. So, I mean, Spider-Man's running through the sewers. The Punisher saves his life because you have Jester and Jack-O-Lantern on the brink of killing Spider-Man. They're about to murder him. Maria Hill tells him to, well, back off a bit or I'll shock you. And they're like, you're lucky, Spider-Man. But if Punisher didn't show up, Spider-Man would have been done. He would have been in the negative zone. Like that. But I can see where that would cause a lot of problems. You have, like Jesse said, these former villains that they fought, legally hunting them down now. The tables have turned.
The people that should be in this prison.
Yeah. And that's the thing, I don't disagree with the notion of the negative zone prison. I agree with the way it went about being used. It was a yes or no. If you say no, it's an automatic, you're in prison. It shouldn't be that black and white. I mean, you're dealing with, in this case, a very complex notion of, registering super beings. I mean, you got the Avengers who are, yes, by all, standard superheroes, but then you have the X-Men. They have the X gene. They're not the same. They're different. But they're also being included in this. And that's, you're changing the whole world upside down for them after they've fought so long for acceptance.
My absolute favorite element of at least the way that it was portrayed in this series was the way that the whole Reed Richards and Susan Storm relationship worked out in this.
Absolutely.
I love the way that was told. And like we said earlier, sometimes this book felt a little bit like Cliff Notes for the event. But I thought that was told as a complete story that you can understand. If you want to know more, I guess that there was a Fantastic Four tie-in, I would imagine.
Yeah.
But, Johnny Storm, very early on in the story, is basically attacked when he's out with a girl because of the whole school explosion. He's blamed just for having superpowers. And Reed Richards becomes very, very proactive in the pro-registration. He gets blinded by it. He's so involved that it does. I would say he's pretty much Tony Stark's second in command. Yeah, he has to be pushed to even go visit Johnny in the hospital, who's recovering from his beating. He's so dead set on doing the task at hand. He ignores everyone else. Well, and that's kind of a character flaw with Reed Richards sometimes, is that he puts his work above his family. And of course, Fantastic Four is all about family. Yeah. Susan Storm ends up joining the anti-registration side. And I believe Human Torch does later on in the story as well. They both go at the same time. Yeah. And you kind of are left on this really nice ending letter from Reed to Susan after registration takes effect, basically saying I hope you understand why I felt I had to do this, but your family needs you. And you kind of get this notion of there has been a split and now they're going to have to kind of work things out. Have to reconcile. I agree. The Fantastic Four story in this, actually, I do feel is pretty complete. Of all the stories, I'd say it's the most complete in this specific collection of Civil War books. It was the emotional core of this miniseries. Because, like you were saying, it ends on Reed Richards basically writing this letter to Sue, and it is about how it is family. I know we were on different sides now that the registration thing is done. We need you back.
We have children. We need you. We can't survive without you.
And that's the thing. Like, to a degree, like you kind of realize that obviously they're going to reconcile because it's Reed Richards and Susan Storm. But that's where I got the emotional impact from what this rift that, this book causes. Really, like, it's tearing apart families. It's not just tearing apart the Avengers team.
Mm-hmm. And that's the other thing too. Like, when Sue originally leaves, she leaves a note for Reed, which basically states, like, this has nothing to do with our family. Mm-hmm. It's unfortunate it's come to this, but I have to leave because I cannot support this side of the argument. I need to be fighting on the other side. Mm-hmm. These are our friends. These are our colleagues. These are people we've known for years who are now being rounded up and thrown in prison and beaten for being who they have always been. Mm-hmm. People that we've always, respected and been there for. So she leaves him this note, and that's actually how it starts. So she leaves a note and ends with him leaving a note, and then she walks in the door. That's actually how Civil War ends. And I agree, that is like emotionally, like, that is the emotion of this. Because other than that, you have, the emotion comes from the other stories that build into this. Mm-hmm. House of M, Amazing Spider-Man, all that stuff builds into this. Their emotional impacts are in those stories.
Yeah, exactly. The Spider-Man story, because I'm an avid Spider-Man reader, in case you can tell from our Spider-Girl podcast, episode 3.
Oh, there you go. Check it out.
Check it out. I got a lot of emotional impact from reading the Civil War Spider-Man story, and I felt like they missed out a lot in this main series. So for me, a lot of that fell onto the Fantastic Four characters. And obviously there's the moment with Cap at the end where he surrenders. That's a really nice emotional moment. But throughout the overall story, it was all Reed and Sue for me.
Yeah, well, as much as this is a quote-unquote civil war, because it is two opposing factions fighting off a particular government policy they disagree with, the Civil War actually is, like Jesse was saying, it's kind of family-oriented. These people have, clung together for so long. They've done so much. They've been through so much together that they're literally being torn apart as friends and family, and they're being forced to pick sides. And the story with the Fantastic Four is that as a microcosm. It is literally the overall story, but in such a small capacity because it's showing one family literally being split apart, which is, synonymous with the whole thing. All these superheroes who are so close being split apart, right? Being forced to pick sides. Being forced to, when they change sides. Actually, both sides actually have a spy in the other one's camp. And that's because they've all been friends. They have each other on speed dial. It actually shows one scene when the spy in Captain America's camp, which I think is Tigra. Is that her name?
Tigra.
Yeah.
Or Tigra.
Tigra. She actually pulls out her cell phone behind the wall, and you see her on speed dial with Tony Stark there. She's getting ready to text him. Like, these people are all friends. And then Hulkling infiltrates the other side and shapeshifts himself into Hank Pym. And he had access to everything Hank did because he sounds like Hank, he looks like Hank, so he had clearance to do everything. But that's the thing, they were all friends with each other, and they knew this stuff, and they could easily infiltrate the other side because they knew each other. It didn't seem like... I'm surprised that there was hesitation when they brought Spider-Man in. When Punisher brings Spider-Man to Captain America, there's a lot of hesitation about whether or not they should even consider Spider-Man. But the hesitation didn't really lie on Spider-Man. There was some. The hesitation relied on Punisher. Because they look at him as just a straight-up killer. I mean, he is. He actually kills 2 villains who want to join them.
Yeah.
He's
just on the spot.
On the spot, pulls his gun down, shoots them down, both of them dead. Everyone's like, what the fuck? You can't, what are you doing? You can't do that. That's
because
insane.
Punisher's brand of justice is no. Villains and killers are villains and killers, and
exactly, and that's his mentality, is that they're using villains on the other team.
Well, that's the thing.
That's wrong.
It even goes out of its way to say that the reason why he joins Captain America's side is because they start doing things like the Thunderbolts initiative.
Yep, And my point was that there was more hesitation about Punisher being involved, who has been on that team since the start, than questioning whether or not Spider-Man was actually, maybe just a ploy. Maybe he was just another infiltrator to the organization. There was less questioning about Spider-Man than there was about Punisher, who they eventually kick out because he straight up murders people. But I thought that was interesting too. I mean, but again, it comes down to they've all known Spider-Man forever.
Yeah.
Right?
They've known him since he was a kid.
Yeah, they're friends with him.
Yeah.
So of course they just let Spider-Man come on in. The Punisher, on the other hand, they didn't really like him to begin with. Mm-hmm. So they were really hesitant to use him. But I would have been a little more cautious with Spider-Man because, I mean, he was Tony Stark's poster child for registration. The whole thing is Tony Stark gets Spider-Man to reveal himself on international television, proclaim himself as Peter Parker, and say that he is pro-registration.
But I think that they know Spider-Man well enough to know that it's not in his character to play that underhanded card.
But is it in the character for Captain America and Iron Man to punch the crap out of each other?
No.
See? Characters change.
I guess so.
People do all sorts of different things when they're under duress, when their family and friends are at stake here. Which is why at the end of it, Civil War is, again, it is this, notion of these two warring tribes kind of coming against each other over this difference in political opinion, but it's actually more of a family feud almost. It's this family and friends split apart over these two opinions. Uncle Rogers is right, but no, Uncle Stark is right. No, and they're just rambling on family members.
But really, you kind of just want them to stop fighting
and hug it out.
Yeah,
like adults, because this should have been solved so diplomatically. It's ridiculous. This is if you were a brand new diplomat, this should be the easiest thing to solve diplomatically. This would be introduction to diplomacy, because at the end of the day, both sides kind of agree with the notion of registration, but they don't agree with certain elements of the policy. I'm all in favor of the fifth estate initiative, but you can't have superheroes revealing themselves because, one, that puts them at risk. The whole reason Peter Parker switches sides is, again, now that people know he's Peter Parker, they know his family.
Well, I think for the most part, the idea of superheroes revealing themselves was just going to be they were going to reveal themselves to S.H.I.E.L.D., and then S.H.I.E.L.D. would have a database with all of them. Peter Parker, I think, was a special case where he unmasked in front of the camera in order to get people...
Yeah, absolutely. But even still, with S.H.I.E.L.D. having all that information, S.H.I.E.L.D. already knew a lot of that. They didn't need it on paper. They already knew most of these people were who they were.
And also a big part later on when Norman Osborn ends up taking over as director of S.H.I.E.L.D., Iron Man has to go in and delete that list before he can get a hold of it.
Yeah, and that's actually, again, with the Thunderbolts, they actually end up as the Avengers, because as Jesse said, Osborn becomes the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., and he becomes really the Iron Patriot.
Yeah.
Using Tony Stark's Iron Man technology suit, but painted up to look like Captain America, the Iron Patriot. He has Moonstone come in and play the role of Miss Marvel.
He has Venom be Spider-Man.
Venom becomes Spider-Man. Yeah. But now you have this whole thing gets hijacked by villains. And they now become the de facto superheroes where we as citizens are meant to, rely on and hope to God that they show up.
And they're the legal ones registered. And now everyone else being this is messed up. We need to take them out. Now they're the ones criminals. Acting. Yeah, exactly.
This series, I would give... Okay, so my thought on this book. Civil War, a Marvel Comics event. This 7-book, 7-comic... book, I would give it an 8 out of 10.
An 8 out of 10.
The reason I give it 8 out of 10 is because it's a phenomenal story. It leads to so many amazing events in the comic universe, like the Thunderbolts, like we just talked about.
Yeah.
Norman Osborn, the legal superhero who was always Spider-Man's arch nemesis.
And he's crazy.
He is crazy. He's literally insane.
He's the last person you want as director of S.H.I.E.L.D.
But he becomes director of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Yeah.
It leads into so many amazing things. And the story itself is phenomenal. And everything that leads into the story is phenomenal. But this 7-issue run specifically, standalone, I give it an 8 because, yes, there are elements to the story that you had to have read from other books. This does not work standalone per se. Mm-hmm. You get enough of the story, which is great. You still understand what's going on. There's just certain characters that have points in here, like Spider-Man specifically.
I think Spider-Man was the one that I noticed the most.
It's blatantly obvious with Spider-Man.
The X-Men pretty much get one page.
If that.
With Tony Stark talking to Emma Frost.
Yeah.
And her being like, just leave us alone. And him being like, let's figure out what to do about them. Yeah. And then it's just kind of left at that.
Yeah, so that's what I would give it. Jesse?
I don't know. I would probably go down to a 7.5 for those same exact reasons. But I think those things bother me a little bit more in terms of it not quite feeling like an incomplete story. That's something that's really annoying about comic events sometimes. Sometimes in order to get the full story, you have to buy all the little side miniseries, and that's really annoying. I love a good comic event that can get everything you need in the main story, and then everything else is extra. It's icing on the cake. And I don't think that this particular event did that amazingly. All the tie-in stuff is great that I've read. This book as well is really good. The concept is amazing.
The premise is phenomenal.
Well, it spawned...
Hence why it's a movie.
And it also spawned a video game. Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2 was based on Civil War.
We actually at some point in the future are going to be discussing comic video games.
Yeah.
So that'll be its own episode. So we will go more in depth into those kind of games.
Why don't you just give it all away on air?
Well, I mean, you want people to know what we're going to be talking about.
I know. I'm just kidding. And that was a really cool video game,
That was
too.
an awesome game, actually.
Yeah.
Forgot about that.
But, one of the things I actually kind of want to say is that when this book was out and, the Iron Man movie was coming out and there was all this talk of them building up to an Avengers movie, which in its own seemed like a really cool thing at the time. And something that had not really been done yet. There were a lot of people talking about maybe one day the Avengers 2 will be Civil War. There was a lot of talk about that, and it's really cool that now we're there where we have the Civil War movie out.
Well, let's talk about the movie real quick.
Okay, sure.
We won't give too many spoilers around the movie.
No.
But we will talk about the overall premise. Now, the premise of this, the comic, is everyone has to register. Whereas in the movie, it's only the Avengers, and the Avengers have to register to the United Nations. So basically, the United Nations will determine through independent committee when to send them into sovereign countries to do what they do and avenge. I found that the movie, Captain America's side, his argument against registration is pretty weak.
Now, I understand to a degree where he's coming from, because literally in the last Captain America movie, S.H.I.E.L.D., an organization that he worked for and believed that was completely trustworthy. Well, more or less. They always kind of had their secrets, but you more or less got the idea that they were good and you could trust them.
Shadowy government figures.
Yeah, ended up being a front for Hydra.
Yeah.
So, I understand his hesitation, but in the movie, in this book, I would say I'm Team Captain America. But in the movie, I would say that I was more Team Iron Man. Tony Stark, I thought, was the rational one. He really tried to talk things out before. It was literally a matter of you're ordered to go capture him, and the alternative is me sending people to shoot him in the head. I agreed with how he handled everything a lot more, and the registration policies in themselves a lot more in the movie.
The registration policy in the movie is more realistic to what actual government policy would look like in the world we live in.
Right.
I do have, a degree in government policy and public administration. That is more realistic, the way they went about doing that. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not you either do this or you go to prison. There's other options. You don't have to be an Avenger, but anyone who wants to be an Avenger has to be registered with us. Mm-hmm. I get where Captain America is coming from because, yes, S.H.I.E.L.D. ended up being a front for Hydra, but at the same time, Captain America is acting in more of a selfish manner. When he finds out Bucky is this, supposed terrorist, he just instantly assumes it couldn't be him, despite the fact that the Winter Soldier is a programmed Soviet super soldier robot guy.
Mm-hmm.
It's realistic that someone could have reactivated him and he could be the terrorist. But to make the assumption that no, he has to be innocent and it's your right as an American not to decide or to decide not to register and that should be grounds enough, that's not strong enough when you've already blown up. And the beginning of the movie does this. It's slow, but it does it well.
Mm-hmm.
It basically shows a montage of the Avengers blowing everything to shit.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is blown up. I mean, the first 15 minutes of the movie, they're blowing shit up in a village.
Oh man, I had Man of Steel flashbacks.
There you go. There you go.
Except
right there.
I enjoyed it more.
That's fair. But I mean, realistically, to be against Tony Stark in the movie that's not rational.
Especially when you're given the choice, you don't want to do this, retire.
Yeah.
It's not a matter of you don't want to do this, we're throwing you in jail.
And it's not like they told the Fantastic Four, the X-Men, obviously because of rights issues, but it's not like they told them they had to.
Well, that's the thing. It's a lot simpler in the movie. Yes. It's a lot more black and white. You're not dealing with mutants and all these other crazy things. You're dealing with the Avengers.
Yes. Who are now going to become an international superhero team as opposed to in America being an American team who shows up to sovereign nations around the world and acts without consequence.
Right.
I mean, that to me, it was no argument, but I don't want to give too much away in regards to Civil War.
Yeah, but just in terms of the registration policies, very different story from the movie to the comic. But yeah, in terms of the comic, I would say I'm Team Cap at the end of the day.
The comic, I would eventually, yes, push comes to shove, would side with Captain America. Mm-hmm. As I stated, both sides have merit. Mm-hmm. Both are right, both are wrong.
But Robert Downey Jr. is just so darn charming.
It's true. Yeah. In the movie, yes. But in the movie, I'm definitely Team Iron Man. I, as a civilian, as a non-superhero person, I couldn't imagine, walking to work one day and, the Hulk or Captain America or whoever, or Iron Man, knocking a building down as I'm walking to work eating a pretzel. Like that's insane. I
mean, not to say that all the fallout from a battle is the Avengers' fault. Obviously they're there to respond and they're doing their best. And, you can't always save everyone.
Of course.
But,
mistakes get made, though.
That's true.
And that was part of my issue with Spider-Man in the Avengers, or in Civil War. But we'll talk about that more specifically when we do our BVS versus Civil War conversation.
I've a lot of people online have been like, well, you can't compare the two. It's two different things. But you know what? When DC and Marvel come out with a movie each about a month apart with the exact same concept, I think they're comparable.
I agree. I mean, it is superhero versus superhero.
Yeah.
It's basically because no one wants to sit down and communicate. It's a giant misunderstanding in both cases. Mm-hmm. That's what it is, and it's sad that it comes to that. But that's how war usually happens.
Although
right?
I think they tried way harder in the Civil War.
Of course they did, but we'll discuss that later.
That's for later. We're gonna give it all away here. So I guess next time we're going to be talking about Teen Titans.
Yes, Jesse is super excited about Teen Titans.
I love the Teen Titans.
I've never read Teen Titans. So.
I'm so excited for you. We will be doing the Jeff Johns run, which I feel like a little bit like I'm showing you Force Awakens before A New Hope, in the sense that part of me kind of feels like we should start with Marvel and stuff, but there are certain points that I want to hit on the Jeff Johns run and talk about. So,
Cool. So that is this episode of the Comic Asylum. Check us out on iTunes. You can search us, the Comic Asylum. Mm-hmm. Download the podcast. You can also tweet us at the comic_asylum.
And you can also comment to let us know which side you were on.
Ooh, yeah, that's a good idea. Comment, let us know. Our email is also available on the SoundCloud, and you can get to our webpage, our blogger, via iTunes or at thecomicasylum.blogspot.com.
Don't be a stranger.
Thanks again. Look forward to talking to you soon.